In the last video, I talked about how the archaic smile was all about being in love with being itself, the happiness to be alive. Now we will discuss why that is significant and meaningful. Boucher wrote about that inner fire from the world of reality, how these archaic statues were full of burgeoning life as he describes it, before their specific character or personality was developed. But why is this reality in life important? To answer this, we need another forgotten art historian, one of my favorites, Wilhelm Worringer. Reality matters because it shows Greek or classical man's total embrace of nature and of the organic, which is a very rare thing in the history of world cultures. Of course, it shows a particular religious worldview or attitude which spawned their entire cultural output, including the birth of philosophy and natural science, which was possible now because man had finally overcome the key terror of life, nature. This is something that Wilhelm Worringer, among others, wrote about and analyzed in an incredible way in his work Form in Gothic. In his chapter called Classical Man, he lays out the second of his three main cultural types, which have distinct attitudes towards the world: primitive man, oriental man, and classical man, from which he then explains how Gothic man is somewhere in between these, and delves deeper into that throughout the entire rest of the book. I think this chapter can help us a lot in describing the state of mind of Greek classical man, which the Archaic Age was the first step towards, therefore further explaining the context for the true reason for the archaic smile. Let's think back on the primitive worldview which Worringer lays out in his first chapter. Boucher called this stage the world of foreshadowings, which refers to the geometric age. A perfect example of this primitive worldview. Worringer writes, "For primitive man, still mentally undeveloped and therefore contemplating the chaos of the world surrounding him with timidity and doubt, artistic activity had meant the impulse to establish another world of perceptual values, a world of absolute and permanent values placed above the shifting world of appearances and free from all the randomness of life. He had therefore remodeled what was living and arbitrary in his ceaselessly fluctuating visual impressions into invariable symbols of an intuitive and abstract kind. His artistic will did not arise from the enjoyment of the direct sensuous perception of the object. Instead, he created precisely in order to subdue the torment of perception, in order to obtain fixed conceptual images in the place of casual perceptual images. Consequently, his art bore a positive, almost scientific character." Alois Riegl, our other commonly mentioned art historian, also theorized that primitive man creates abstract art because he needs rigid and fixed geometric linear forms, such as inorganic or crystalline forms, to feel calm in the tumult of chaos of organic life. Worringer goes on to say, "The inevitability and orderliness which primitive man, the becoming man, could seek only at the back of things, beyond the phenomenon itself, in the negation of life, are sought by classical man in the world itself. And as man and world are now one, are now entirely assimilated one to the other, he finds this orderliness in himself and boldly projects it into the world." In other words, the Greeks now start to apply this biological human need for order to their newfound interest in accurately understanding the living world. They made symmetrical but much more lifelike shapes for the human body and facial features. He finds an avenue for developing reality through the symmetry and order that nature itself possesses. Not only does he no longer see the real natural world as one of chaos, movement, and possessing a lack of fixed orderly forms, which he has to escape from, but he actually even sees the symmetry and order within nature now. Most importantly, he sees this within himself. He doesn't need to form his religion in an act of turning away from nature, taking him to a realm of eternality and contemplation separate from the material world, in order to explain why we are here at all. He can be fully in the world and remain calm throughout, as religion foments his naturalism, and then gives way to natural science and art. Worringer writes, "For classical man, the divine no longer exists as an exterior world. It is no longer a transcendental idea, but exists for him in the world, is embodied in the world." Riegl wrote about these universal qualities as being the key elements of art, the inorganic, or crystalline, as fundamentally possessing symmetry, because it'll always display perfect symmetry upon viewing, and the original artistic impulse. And as a counterpoint, the organic, which possesses symmetry internally but is disrupted by movement. Think about the way that animals, flowers, and leaves possess symmetry when you study their anatomy. The Greeks mastered the art of incorporating the organic and its true principles, its reality, into their art. Hence their world-shaking realism and naturalism. They didn't abstractify reality like almost every other culture in order to be able to tolerate it and deal with it artistically. This attitude was specific and peculiar to the Greek character, by no means universal or common. Worringer describes how, in this moment, man takes center stage in the world's anthropomorphizing process, which is a big cultural step forward. He says, "The world is no longer something strange, inaccessible, and mystically great, but a living completion of his own ego. And he sees in it, as Goethe says, the responsive counterparts of his own sensations." Primitive man's vague, instinctive criticism of perceptual knowledge gives way to a joyous, self-conscious belief in perceptual knowledge. As universal piety, according to Goethe's meaning, developed from universal fear, so a vital impulse for empathy developed from a powerful impulse for abstraction. With all his senses, classical man devotes himself to the sensuous world of appearances in order to remodel it after his own image. There is no longer anything inanimate for him. He animates all things with his own life. To him, artistic activity means fixing in visible form the ideal process whereby he accords his own sensibility to the living world around him. He no longer avoids the casualness of phenomena, but merely chastens them to an organically smooth orderliness. In other words, chastens them by means of the indwelling counterpoint of his own feeling for life, of which he has become joyously aware. He says at another point, "The feeling for beauty in living things, for the joy-inspiring rhythm of the organic world has awakened." This transference of feeling, empathy, reveals to classical man the pleasures of contemplation. To the anthropomorphization evolved by science in the intellectual and sensuous domain of knowledge, there corresponds in the religious domain that creative impulse, which represents the gods in human form, considering them as ideally superior human beings, who are only distinguished from human beings in degree, not in kind. He continues, "At this classical stage of human development, creative art consists in the ideal demonstration of conscious and chastened vitality. It becomes an objectified sense of one's enjoyment. Freed from all dualistic memories, man celebrates, in art as in religion, the realization of a felicitous state of spiritual equilibrium."